Okay, woo! Nothing like going from one call to another and meeting to meeting to meeting. Today has been a chaotic day. Welcome back, everyone. I apologize for my tardiness, my lack of prep, my lack of setup. So this is going to be a shot from the hip while I quickly try and figure out my microphone situation, all of my setup. Normally I have like 20, 30 minutes to get prepped before I start my stream. Yeah, I had more like 15 seconds. So that's a little fun and different and new and exciting. So tonight. Let me see. I gotta find my way into a good view of this. So there was a stream that I did a while back, and I will drop a link to it. Let's see, injection, something. Yeah, this guy. So, oh, hush, don't talk. So this guy right here. So it was a stream that I had done about dependency injection and generic host and WPF, and there was some questions that got dropped in here, and I think it was this one here. Yeah. So, and that is tiny, so we're gonna make this bigger. Oh boy. I don't know if that was a good way to make that bigger or not. We're gonna scroll that up. I'm gonna move this off, and I'm going to try to do this different. Again, normally I would have more time prepping this, and yeah, I didn't have any time prepping this. But there was some really good questions that came up, because with a lot of this dependency injection stuff, it's hard to give hard and fast rules and guidance in a lot of cases, because it's not always clear exactly what the correct answer is in all situations. So, Nikolai, and why will you not let me do this the way I want? That'll work. We're just gonna grab a screenshot here, and I'm just gonna go to town, and we're going to go quick, and I'm just gonna edit this stuff on the fly. Yeah, paste, crop, file, save. Like I said, no prep whatsoever. Sure, great. Yeah, that sounds great. Take defaults. And then, if we come down here, we come up here, we go, add source, image, okay, browse. I need to remember where the heck I just saved the file to. Again, I apologize for my lack of preparedness. But this question only came in last night, 2 days ago, something like that. And I saw it and thought, that'll be a perfect discussion point. Because I have wanted to do additional... There we go. That's what we want. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to take this, and I'm going to just go... I'm going to make you big. And then we're just going to... Okay, so we're going to take these kind of piecemeal one at a time. And the nice part is there was a really great... there's some links inside of the comment there about a repository with a gist kind of showing the problem, and then as well as a repository. So I was actually going to clone the repository, or I forked it earlier, but I was going to check out the repository and then kind of walk through what a solution would end up looking like. So, because I think sometimes a practical application goes a long way. Okay, so the first question, and I guess we'll back up a little bit. So anybody who hasn't watched that DI injection generic host stuff, here's a 30-second summary, but I recommend going back and watching that other video. So dependency injection is all about separating and decoupling your code. So oftentimes people get into the interface madness where they want to make an interface for everything. That works. Not a great idea in all cases. I set an alarm to catch your streaming live for once. Hey, how's it going? Welcome back. I'm pretty sure I know. Is that Patrick? I apologize if I don't recognize the screen name. But with dependency injection, the point is to decouple your code. More importantly, the big idea is constructors, especially inside of C#, are effectively static methods. When you call new insert type here, that is tightly coupling one class to another. And more importantly, as your code base grows, that's not great. It becomes very difficult. There's a common pattern that says you should have low coupling, high cohesion between your code. And the DI is one way to try and achieve that. Emphasis on one way. There will be some people don't like dependency injection, and there is some very valid critiques. That said, my opinion is that it adds some complexity and it's very worthwhile. Specifically, it is worthwhile if you are writing tests. A lot of times critique comes in the form of people who necessarily don't always write unit tests or only like to write functional or end-to-end style tests. That's fine. But if you're writing unit tests, dependency injection is kind of a must. So with all of that said, let's kind of talk through some of these cases here. And actually, I think I'm going to switch over to here. And I think what I can do. So this is, nope, I am focused on the wrong screen. There we go. Okay. So this is the gist that was sent in with that YouTube question, kind of outline specifically the problem that he was running into. So the big idea is he built a small WPF application just to practice dependency injection. A great idea. It's always good to build small samples just to make sure you understand concepts. Highly recommended. And for this program, think of a web browser. So I'm using Edge right here. Web browsers have tabs, and inside of each of these tabs are the web content, and that content of each tab is largely isolated from another tab. In the web browser world, they often go to the effort of spinning separate processes to power each of these, and we won't get into all the complexity of that. But at least from a DI perspective, the desire was to say, okay, I've got this tab style interface. It's great. I like tabs. But within each of those tabs, I would like to create a dependency injection scope so that the dependencies are resolved slightly differently. Just as a quick reminder, so when going through the Microsoft Dependency Injection Abstractions library, there are 3 lifetimes, or I don't want to use the word scope. Yeah, lifetime. We're going to go with lifetime. 3 lifetimes that you can apply to each of the services that you register. So the first in the simple list is singleton. So in this case, this is saying add a singleton. So anybody who requests an I tab view model factory gets this big long name, and this thing, there should only ever be one. Singleton, as the name implies, there is a single, one. Uno. You only ever get one of these things ever created. Now this isn't created right away. It's created at the first point something requests it. But a lot of times with singletons, they tend to be requested pretty early in the startup process. So most of them will get built pretty quick on app startup. The other one is transient. So with a transient lifetime, anytime something asks for a tab view model, it will get a new instance every single time. And then there's the middle ground right here. So we've got, you only get one, and then you always get a new one. So you get n many. And then scoped is a little bit different. So scoped is kind of a weird one in the WPF world. In a ASP.NET Core world, you intrinsic or the framework will give you a built-in scope. So every time, if you think of just a web API, every time a request comes into your API, under the hood, what happens is ASP.NET Core creates a DI scope and then resolves your dependencies within that scope. And each DI scope will resolve a different instance of the scope tab view model. Okay, so each DI scope will get a different instance of this tab view model. But if the same scope asks for a scope tab view model twice, both of those requests will get the same instance. So there's kind of this middle ground. And we'll get into actually making scopes. And it's a little more unusual to use scoped inside of a thick client WPF application. Because inside of the ASP.NET Core world, or especially when using the DI container, a lot of times we don't really use scopes. We don't create them because the framework's doing that for us. But like I covered in the previous video on the DI, for the generic host, there is nothing in the framework. WPF doesn't know anything about generic host. It's oblivious. It could care less. So unless you've brought in some other framework into your application, nothing knows about generic host, and nothing's going to be making you dependency injection scopes at all. That's something you now have to manage yourself. So that brings us sort of into that question, and I am going to quickly grab that and bring it back. Oh yeah. It's almost like I know what I'm doing. Almost. I don't, but let's okay, so we're gonna scope this down. See? Editing on the fly. Look at that. And then we're just gonna, I don't know, collapse that up a little bit, collapse that up a little bit, and then we're gonna make this bigger. Boom, boom, boom. So when we register services, it turns out they must be in the same library as host builder, or these classes must be public. That is correct. That is correct. There are some workarounds you can, so just to address. So specifically, registering services, meaning the stuff inside of the configure services bit. Because this is just regular C# code using generics, this generic type has to be accessible from inside of this configure services class. That is a bit, so that does sort of predicate on it needing to be public or in the same library as the host builder. So wherever you instantiate your generic host. I'm assuming this is a WPF application, so inside of the WPF application rather than a shared library. With that said, though, that doesn't always have to be the case. So you can kind of cheat a little bit. What you can do is you can actually pass this services instance into another library, and then you invoke that method inside of configure services. And then once you pass this iService collection, which is the type of services here, once you pass that iService collection into your other library, it can then register other internal types into the DI container, and that works just fine. So a common pattern that you will see in various libraries, like let's look at Serilog ASP.NET, because I was just doing this one earlier. Yeah, we'll look here. So Serilog is a logging application. Great. That's not inside the register services. Oh, doesn't it have a... it does have a... So it hijacks it at a slightly higher level. So poor example on my part. I was hoping for a... let me clone that repository real quick and open it, and I can probably show the example quicker than I can talk through it. But you can't, basically, you can expose yourself a public API into another library that has internal types and register those. Real quick, question hide, boom. See if I can do this on the fly. This is gonna be fun. Normally I try to like prep my question images and have all those set. Yeah, I'm normally not editing them on the fly. So for example, if we were to do something like this, so add new project, load, class library sounds great. Yeah, class library 1 sounds even better. Sure, .NET 6, great. Boody boppity boo, yeah. So, and let me just make sure this guy's .NET 6, great. So, for example, if inside of here I have something like internal class, my internal service, right? But I have a public interface, I service. Boom. Just set this up real quick. I service public static void add internals. This I service collection. Hush now. Services. I'm gonna have to do this a little differently. How should we do in a WPF pass or make services? Let me type this example because the sample here is probably what I would recommend doing. Like I said, doing this on the fly. Dependency injection. Give me back my abstractions library. No, not preview release. We'll stick on GA for the moment. Oh boy. Okay. So and this should resolve. Great. So then we go services, add, I don't know, singleton, I service my internal service. So something akin to this. And then back where your service provider is, what we would do is we got to add a reference to our project. Because if we don't reference it, we can't touch it. And then we will do services, add internals. Something like this. Boom. So to go back and then answer the question. So if you have types that exist in another library, and I am making a bit of an assumption that you have control over that other library. If it's a third-party thing, you're kind of just stuck. But assuming you have some measure of control over that library and can get access to those types elsewhere, you can have internal types. And this interface here could also be internal. There's nothing referencing iService. But then expose a public API that could then register those things up. Now, the normal way to expose an API that does additional registrations is typically by adding an extension method on to iService collection. This is the common pattern that you will see a lot of libraries use when they want to register stuff up. Because oftentimes a library, when for like ASP.NET Core, it will have more than one thing here. It'll have, its 4 dozen things that it wants to register to get itself all set up and ready to go. And it's why a lot of apps, their getting started guide is, okay, you add this one line to your configure services, and now that gets everything registered. And then there's usually one other line somewhere else that you put that's like, kick the thing in gear and make it go. And that's it. And all these methods are doing is just adding that extension method onto iService collection to provide an injection point where they can register types up. Whether those types are internal, public, whatnot, doesn't matter. It gives you a nice isolated way of doing it. This pattern here of doing the registrations, I actually like making these extension methods even inside of my WPF application, just as a means of grouping like services together. Like if I've got a set of things that all should register together, like I've got a bunch of logging stuff, I might write a little extension method on iService collection that's, add Kevin's cool loggers. Great. And then in my code, rather than this configure services method growing exponentially, I now have a short method that's, add Kevin's cool loggers, and at least as I'm reading through this, it's very clear. Oh, okay, that's adding my logging stuff, that's adding this, this is adding all my view models, right? And it works great. So, but at least in terms of that registration. So, coming back to this question of trying to figure out what is the best way to register additional data. So, if we look back at the gist, That's not it. Boom, 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 boom. So specifically what's happening, I thought I saw it in one of these. Yeah, this guy here with this additional coupling that's coming in. So what's ending up happening is we've got this tab view model factory, which is creating a tab view model. So standardish factory pattern. I think in the DI stream from before, I showed even using a func if you want to go kind of stupid simple level stuff. But then you end up with this kind of extra coupling bit floating along here. And this raises a little bit of a code smell, but it's also a code smell that you don't have a lot of control over. The other thing that's worth calling out here as well is it does mean that once you kick this thing in gear, so for example, inside of here, the call that actually starts the DI process running is this call right here. So this create host builder is just getting our host builder set up, doing all the registrations, everything's working. But what actually kicks the dependency injection into gear is when we say, okay, now build me something, right? So the DI container is the recipe book. And at some point we say, okay, now we got to make a cake. And this is the make me a cake line, where it goes in and says, okay, I need a main window. And then the main window, in this case, probably takes in a main window view model, right? And so, okay, so in order to make a main window, I have to instantiate a main window view model. Well, how do I make a main window view model? Okay, I need an iMessenger and I need a tab view model factory. And it's dependency injection all the way down, right? Once you start down the dependency injection path, the goal is to eliminate any call to new. So don't invoke any constructor for any trying to decide. Service dependency might be the better way of doing it. But what the original question is positing is, okay, we've done that. We've kind of set this up, and I don't know how far. Let me look and see how far he actually got in this, because I didn't actually look into this. So scope view model factory, tab view model. This guy comes in here. Yeah, and so this is where things start to get a little weird, right? And this pure DI constructor is kind of a misleading name, because this is the one that's actually going to be invoked by the DI container, because the DI container doesn't know anything about strings, right? And you could make it, you could tell it every time you need a string, here's what string to use. The problem is this string is going to be very much data driven. This isn't one that should exist outside. And let me look here, because I assume, yeah, this is going to be the guy that does effectively the same thing. And so he's going to create a scope and create a service provider and do all of this stuff and pass this table name through, because this is table view model factory, and then this passes this in. So a couple comments for this question. So this actually comes up quite a bit, where I've got an object I want to create. It has some DI dependencies, some interfaces in its constructor, but it also has a bit more data to go along with it. And I want to make sure that everyone who instantiates this thing passes along a bit more data to go with it, right? I've run into this quite a bit when building up view models, where the view model takes in, and I think this one already had it, an iMessenger. Yeah, this is a beautiful example, where the view model, it needs the iMessenger. So I think I've talked about this before. This is the generic pub sub methodology, and it is using the MVVM toolkit. Great. To be able to post notifications, right? I've got a simple view model. He's largely there to support the view, but when a certain thing happens, he's going to post a message that somewhere else in the app cares, yada, yada. Great. But so this thing I need to resolve from my DI container, but this thing I really need the caller to pass me, because in this case, my my table name really is extra source data. And the short version is there's not a great solution here. There's really not a great solution here. Well, there are some common patterns. So the default pattern about going through this is, and the original poster landed on what I would say is typically the right solution. The right solution in this case is typically a factory pattern, and I think he probably did it correct. Well, this is a little off of how I would do it. So a factory pattern is the correct solution, because the big idea here is the factory should have the DI dependencies to inject, but then the factory's method, let me scroll that, boom. But then the factory method, the one that's actually going to create it, should have parameters for all of the data that needs to be passed in addition to all of the stuff that's really data driven. So that's the big idea. So to say that again, the factory should contain all of the DI dependencies, but then its method should take in the additional data, the user provided, the data driven stuff. I haven't even tried this. We're going to launch it and just see what happens. I briefly scanned the code to make sure there was nothing horrendous that was going to like delete my system, and then I stopped looking. And this is the problem when you go from one call to the next. Okay, so no tabs. Add tabs using the button in the title bar. Great. We add a tab, we add a tab, we add a tab, and we build this up. Okay, cool. So this thing works. This thing has a closed tab. Closed tab. This is rather nice. I kind of like it. Very, very slick design. Looks like Ma Apps window, I'm guessing. If I look, I didn't actually look at it. Maybe we should take a brief look at this. Yeah, so it's a Ma Apps Metro window. Pulling in some material design stuff on top of it. Great. I like it. It looks nice. Very clean design. Okay, so let's back up and look at how I would probably go about attacking this. So I think the factory interface is exactly correct. And if we look here, let's see, because the key part here is your main window view model needs to be able to create child tabs. At the end of the day, when I hit the new tab button, my main window, and this view model is the one that's powering the main window, it needs to be able to create new tabs. And it could either have a reference to the factory, or sometimes what I've done is I've used a messenger to post a message out and say, someone make me a new tab. In this case, it's probably better for this one to have the factory, because this the main window also contains the lists of tabs as well. Yeah, and so this goes here, adds a tab, changes the selected tab. Great. And you can see the big idea here is it's just maintaining an account. So as you create and delete tabs, you can go through and get more. And it looks like this thing just always counts and never decrements, which is great. We'll never get a dupe. Awesome. Love it. And builds it up. Okay, so this much here is correct. But then the question is, this tab view, we want it to be resolved inside of a scope. And this is a bit of an anti-pattern here. So in general, I try to avoid having my view models know anything about service scopes or iService provider. I think I had mentioned in various other videos how if you end up taking in an iService provider, which an iService scope is basically that, because an iService scope has exactly one member. Let's see. Service provider. So scope is basically a service provider. If you end up needing that, it's rare that a class needs to take in an iService provider as a dependency, because that's effectively saying my class needs to act on everything in the DI container. Really? There are cases where that's legitimate, but it's not often. It's not. It's usually pretty specialized. Rarely do you have a class that needs to act on all the stuff. Okay, so we're gonna do something a little different. So our goal is to instantiate this guy inside of a scope every time that factory is raised. And I think what we're gonna do is we're gonna come in here and we're gonna change up how I would do this factory a little bit. Because this factory wants to create the tab, but it wants to create it inside of a scope. And the other thing that's worth noting is there's also this idea of the when a tab is closed, you actually want to call dispose on your scope. So that's actually, and I believe that was another. If I make this bigger, yeah, part 2, and these are going to end up going together. I'm clipping that off just a little bit. Then we'll make it a little smaller, Boom, fits. So part 2 is then dealing with the service scope. And Nikolai is correct that most examples that show you using iService scope online, they almost always show you wrapping it in a using block, which works great in something like ASP.NET Core, where the lifetime of your scope is going to be, hey, I'm going to do some number of operations, and then I'm going to shut down, or then I'm going to be done. That's not usually the case in a thick client app. Usually things are living for a longer period of time, and then more specifically, these tend to be event-driven. Like in this case, the lifetime of the scope is the scope starts when I hit new tab, and it gets disposed when I hit close tab. And you can't really wrap that in a using statement. That doesn't really work. So we're gonna see if we can build this. But building that's gonna require a Mountain Dew. So, because I need caffeine. Oh boy. Caffeine and code. Is there a better combination? I submit there is not. Okay, so let's think through doing this down here. So this has various bits along here. So step 1, I would go through and I would change up this guy here. So we're going to do this and we're going to do this. And so the comment here of this does not work as all tabs will share the same view model. This is only sort of true. It depends on how these get resolved. Because each scope should instantiate a new one of these guys. And so we're going to just confirm that, because that should be how it works. And I don't see any reason why it shouldn't be. I think the crux of the issue is likely with this factory. And so what we're going to do is we're going to register up our own factory. Yeah. And let's turn Karnak on. Go. Okay, so is it worth keeping the old one, or do we just whack it? Well, we'll just whack it. Okay, so we're gonna hijack this guy. Okay, so this guy is going to have, I should do a different class because this thing is a base class to other stuff. So we're just gonna do a new one. Just to disambiguate a little bit. I apparently can't type. My mic's in my way. There. My tab view model factory, and clear that out. Okay. So this guy has a service provider, and this is probably yeah, and the comment here of ugh, this needs to be updated whenever the constructor changes. That is a legitimate ugh. A legitimate ugh. It's not great. It's not great. There is a library I have called AutoDI. I'm even going to hesitate to share a link to it. It needs to be updated. I have not updated it for Net 6. I have not updated it for nullable reference types. It does work around this exact problem, and it does it in a very abusive IL weaving sort of auto magic things occur randomly type way. So it works great, but there's a bunch of caveats to go along with it. So Just be aware of that. And it breaks live unit testing if you're using that. Live unit testing is not hip to the idea of something magically going through and mucking with the IL after the compiler's been done with it. It is not okay with that. And rightfully so. It usually, making the assumption that the compiler creates the IL is usually a pretty good assumption. Usually. Okay, but I think what we want to do here is a couple things. So one, we do need to have the service scope. So there is this, right? So we do need, when a tab is created, we do want to create a scope. And this is what's actually going to end up making the difference of getting the different instances. And I guess in this case, we don't even need, if we have the factory for it, we don't even need this. Trying to think of the clean way to handle this. You could almost handle it the same way the logger does, but that's a little yucky. Kind of like just, because we're not going to have anything that makes a request for a tab view model directly, everything's going to just go through the factory. I think we can get rid of that and just go into here. Okay, and then, so this is effectively going to make this guy transient, and I think that's okay. I think that's okay. The thing that I really don't like about this guy currently, and I think it was this is attaching a service scope to it. And it's only doing it so that there's a way of doing cleanup. Yuck. So I'm trying to decide if I was building this app, which way I would go about doing it. I've often built manager classes for this exact purpose. And that might be a clean approach here. But I also might just let this guy handle it all completely. So we're just going to go, okay. So, worth noting, there are a lot of different ways to approach this problem. A lot of different ways to approach this problem. And I think what we might do is inside of here, I'm trying to decide, we could have him post a message when he closes. And he already is. So we could have a message post. I don't think iDisposable needs to be a thing. We could totally get rid of iDisposable. But maybe we just leverage this message. Because this is sending a message. And we could have it, we could tokenize it. Screw it. We'll just, the closed tab request contains the tab view model. Good enough. Because this guy is watching for it to know to remove the tab. Which is perfect. So this message already is required so that the rest of the app needs to know what to do. So I think what we're going to do is this guy here is actually going to also take in the iMessenger. This guy's going to go here. Worth noting, we could avoid resolving this here. So we don't have, because we're now taking in the iMessenger, we could cache this in a field or property, right? And I would probably do this a little differently. So generally if something's a camel case like this, it's usually expected to be a property, and I'll generally do that. Rather than typing read only in front of the field. But, you know what? I think we're going to cache the messenger. Let's cache it too. And do that. And then we'll add an old check. Because this... So, worth noting, I think nullable reference types are... Yeah, nullable enable is on. Sometimes... there's an argument to be made that you don't need to null check inside of your own assembly when you have nullable reference types turned on and just rely on the compiler to create to do it correctly. The issue I have with constructor stuff is this constructor, you'll note, is going to have 0 references to it, which means it's being invoked via the DI container, which isn't necessarily going to respect nullable reference types. Now, I know based on the DI container that we're using that it will throw an exception rather than passing a null through. But if someone were to explicitly register a null, technically a null would go through. I just add the null check because it's not an API that I am in 100% control of. I expect this to be invoked via reflection, via something outside of me. So that means this guy down here becomes messenger. But I'll leave a comment to resolve any other DI dependencies that are needed from the scope. So if this guy ended up getting another, iService thingy here, resolve it from the scope. And the nice part about these scoped service providers is if you call into that scope service provider and the type you ask for is a singleton, it's just going to go back up to the parent, find that singleton, and grab it for you. You don't have to deal with it. It only changes the resolution for things that are registered scoped. It keeps track of that. You don't have to think. You just need to make a scope. And then more importantly, you need to clean up the scope. But what we're going to do here now is we need to register as a handler for that message, just like this guy did. See, and I'm just going to copy it rather than type it because I'm lazy. Boom. And then implement interface. Great. And then so when we receive this message, what we need to do then is go and clean up the scope. Now, the only way we're going to know how to clean up this scope that we've created actually, you know what we're going to do? Trying to think this one through here real quick. No, we're going to leave this like this, I think, for now. I was going to do something clever, but it adds complexity for no gain. But I think we are going to go back and make this guy re-resolve. I know that the only way this works is if iMessenger is registered singleton and it falls apart otherwise. But let's not make that assumption. Okay. And then what we are going to do here is we are going to do private dictionary. There you are, Robert. Yes, WPF and DI. Is there a better thing? I don't know, maybe. What is it? I can't remember the type of this. See, this is why var is bad. I can't remember the type. Use explicit type. Thank you. Boom. Okay, and we'll just call this thing service scopes, something like that. We'll do it here, and we'll keep track of it. So the big idea here is I want, because this factory is responsible for creating up the scope, I want this factory also responsible for make WPF great again. I want this factory, because it created it, it should be the one managing it. I don't want to hand that off. I don't want to rely on something else to take care of these things for me. So we will do this, and we will do this. And then what we're going to do down here is if, let's see, service scopes, and I'm going to do this a little differently. Concurrent dictionary. You have to be a little careful with just regular dictionaries, because you can certainly get bit in a lot of cases with threading. There's actually a bug against the AutoMocker library right now because somebody whose name might be Kevin may have used a dictionary in a class that he assumed wasn't expected to be thread safe. Somebody else assumed it was, and well, problems occurred. Minor details. And actually, we kind of want to do, is there a try remove? Yeah, we want to do a try remove, I think. I wish it returned me back the... So we have to do a try get value. I wish there... I want to try remove that returns me the value. Does remove give me back the value? No, you just give me a bool. It's not helpful. Okay. Try get value. So we'll start with this. So message dot tab view model. Let's see. Out I service scope. And then just, oh, that's supposed to be nullable, isn't it? Yeah. So, and then down here we will do service scopes, try remove, and we'll just blind do it, because we don't actually care about success or failure at this point. What's your problem? Try remove. Oh, you want me to try to remove... Oh, try remove wants the whole key value pair. What? Oh, try remove actually does do what I want. Oh, shoot. Do that. Boom. So on the remove successful, it gives me back the scope. We'll call scope dispose. Okay, so just to bring it back. So this is going back to the second part of this question of scope management, where we don't have a using block. We need something outside of it, and more importantly, the something outside is going to be event driven, not procedurally done with a using block, because that's not a real thing, right? And so the ending of question 2, I think, is the key part. How would I go about letting each tab live on its own scope while still following DI principles and best practices? So, and I think this sort of pattern probably does it best. Oh, and we need to actually register up, otherwise this ain't going to do jack. So register this. So worth noting, I've seen this trip people up a little bit with the iMessenger as well, is if you are, like, you can get away with register this as long as your class has a single I recipient. The moment your class has multiple I recipients, you actually have to specify the generic parameter to the register call. So just be aware of that. You can get away with simplistic syntax here, but the moment you add more than one message to your class, you do have to disambiguate and tell it which message you're registering for. So just be aware of that. Okay, so I think I've done these a little out of order. That'll be question 2. Question 2 of how do you do scope management? So the answer I would say, and again, this is a lot of these answers tonight are going to be very much, it kind of depends on your app. So I'll offer guidance, but bear in mind, this is not the silver bullet, always must do this. This is given this kind of setup, this is probably how I would attack the problem, and then extrapolate from there. Don't take it as gospel. Okay. So something like this, and I'm going to drop the word to do because it's more of a NB. For people who are not familiar with this acronym, this is Nota Bene. It is Latin, most popular in like legal circles. It means note well, or in really layman's terms, pay attention. I've had many a colleague ask me, why do you put NB over everything? And because my last name starts with a B, they assume that maybe I go by my middle name and I've got some weird first name, or I don't know. It's like, no, it's Latin. You don't know Latin? And then there's been a handful of colleagues who see it and go, Kevin says do it this way. Got it. Sigh. I can put as many red flag warnings on this as I want, and somebody will definitely always take it that way. Don't. Okay. Stop bringing legal crap into software development. I blame one of my first mentor when I got out of university actually used it in the code base, and that's where I learned it from. I didn't know that it was a legal terminology until much later in life. So I learned it from him. It's his fault. Blame him. Okay. We've got that. We've got that. That should create our tab view models. And I think the app just works. Let's test. So it'd be kind of cool if we did all of that work and changed it up and didn't have to change like the real bits of the code here. So, whoop. So we created a new tab view model. That's great. Okay, I'm going to turn these breakpoints off and continue. The new tab. Okay. Close tab. Okay, I want to just check our factory and make sure that we are in fact doing the right thing. So when we get in here, we should have 3. Close tab. Service scopes. Count of 3. That's pretty good. Boom, boom, boom. Disposes of the scope. Everything goes away. That's pretty good. Somewhat satisfying too. Very satisfying. Very, very satisfying. Oh, it caps. There's a limit on how many tabs I can make? What disabled the command? Oh, there is a create new command. Oh. Well, look at that. So I can only make okay, so it's got I was like, weird. Okay, no, it's just got a can execute delegate. So you can only have 5 tabs open at a time. Okay. Sorry, thank you, Robert. I was sitting here going, what do you mean 5 tabs? I'm up to like 15. No, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, I get. Hang on, this means lack of Mountain Dew. There we are. There we go. Okay. Much better. Much better. Okay, so short version, have some Mountain Dew, and then the code will make a lot more sense. Okay, or at least that's my solution. Your mileage may vary. In fact, I think most other people mileage will probably vary very differently than my own. Okay, so that handles, I think, let me just pop that up. So question 2. And question 1 we sort of answered already. Just to be clear, the solution that he started with a factory, I believe, is correct. That would be my suggestion for how to handle it is factory pattern, especially if you want to combine, DI dependency with DI dependency with additional data. Right? Whenever you have a little of column A, little of column B, I think a factory is probably the correct solution. With the key parts of the factory, just to call this out again, the factory should take in the DI dependencies. Now, in this case, it's taken in an iService provider. It doesn't have to, right? Like if we did, let's imagine for a moment that we did not have the restriction of wanting to pass in a how do I say this? We didn't have the restriction of wanting to do it inside of a scope, and we just wanted to say, hey, I've got this thing, it takes in an iMessenger, I want it to take in a tab name. How do I do that generically? Well, the DI dependencies go in the factory's constructor. The factory gets registered so that his dependencies will get instantiated appropriately. And then your factory's method, the actual create or whatever we end up calling it, and a factory doesn't necessarily have to have one. A factory is just a generic term for thingy that builds other thingies. His create method should take in whatever the data-driven parts are. Okay? And I believe that is what I would say is the answer. Hey, welcome. Patrick, I think. So I would say those are the 2 answers to 1 and 2. Factory for 1 is correct. Make sure that it is set up appropriately. Patrick, I was going to ask you, I meant to send you an email. Do you mind if I show your the application that you emailed me off? I was going to potentially use that as a learning example of how to track down the problem. But I didn't want to pop your application up without permission. Okay, so third question on here. So nested view models. So in this case, we have a complex user control that we want to have a dedicated view model for. And this doesn't currently exist inside of here. So a dedicated view model, when I then add the user control to the main window, it has a main window view model. How do I go about getting the right view model for the view while still following DI principles? Should the main window view model simply have a my user control injected or similar? This doesn't feel completely right. And this is going to be, and we're going to strip the question down to just that. We'll go right there. Yeah, of course, you helped me too. Perfect. Well, I may use that as question 4 here in a little bit, just to show off kind of how I walk through debugging it and whatnot if people are interested. So thank you. Okay, so let's do a quick example of this. So we're gonna go in here and we'll do actually real quick. I want to check this in. Sample with factory and scope management. So we'll just do that. We'll push it, and if anybody is interested, copy link to repo. Oh. Really? Really, get cracking? That's the link that it copied when I went copy remote. I'm a little curious what it does now. Because it's a get. Oh, this is so that you can send the link to other people using GitKraken. That's not what I want. That's not what I want. I want the link to the repo out on GitHub. Okay, that's what we want. So if anybody wants to play with this code, again, this is just a small demo application that was linked from that YouTube comment. So it is. So take all of this as demo level code. Okay, so let's do a quick example of this nested thingy real quick. So we're gonna just create ourselves a user control, and we'll call it my user control because that is a useful name. Okay, and then down here we're gonna go add class. See, my control view model, something like that. And then also, I don't know if people have noticed this, but the MVVM toolkit has a pretty cool update in the works with some really awesome stuff. I've been meaning to go through, and I was tempted to do a stream on it a few weeks ago, and then it's still preview and stuff is changing, and I'm like, do I do a stream that's going to be out of date in like only like a month or so? I was like, maybe I'll wait. So once it drops their next release, there's some pretty cool stuff in there. Like you just throw some attributes on there, and they've got some source generators that just gen up the world for you. It's like, whoo, that is awesome. So question, does tab control recreate each tab's view when switching between tabs? Oh, that is a great question. That is a very, very good question. So the answer is yes, and also no. Okay. So the question being, does this recreate the view each time? So the tab control by default is virtualized. And so because tabs tend to have a lot of stuff inside of them, right? Like people build tabbed UIs a lot. And so the stuff that's inside of this may not be insignificant. There can be a lot of controls, a lot of heavy weight. And so it tries to, as best as it can, unload and reload tabs. So the yes and no portion of the answer is the way this UI is set up. I'm pretty confident that what is going to happen is because it's automatically switching to the tab as soon as you create a new one, it's going to instantiate the view elements. Now, I believe it will unload the old ones. I'm going from memory here, but I think it does unload the old ones when you switch. But we can confirm that here in just a second. So we're going to take Snoop. We're going to go in here. Boom. So I did that fast. So for people who want to know the keystroke, you grab the little crosshairs next to the binoculars, drag it over, and pull it up. Oh, watch James's video. Yeah, so that was one of the ones that I saw too that tipped me off about all of the cool stuff coming. It's pretty slick. It's really slick. But I figured I would wait until it releases and then we'll show it off. I know there's already some stuff in the latest version because I've got a video that I did a while back on kind of MVVM basics. And at the time I used MVVM Lite. And I've been wanting to go back and do an updated version of that video using more up-to-date packages with all of the coolness that has come with them. Because I still get a lot of views and people going back and looking at that MVVM one. Which most of the information in there, nothing's wrong. It's just that there's newer and cooler ways to do the same stuff with a little less typing, which is pretty cool. Okay, so we've got this tab. So crosshairs onto here, and then I put my cursor over an element that I wanted, and I hit Control-Shift. And so Snoop will zero you in right on that element. And I'm pretty sure what's going to happen is when I do this, it's not going to unload. See, and there's going to be a limit to how much it does and doesn't. But generally, if you don't have if you start off by building a WPF application with and you just do like tab control, tab item, tab item, tab item all the way. Sorry, I should do it like this. Tab item all the way across. Only the visible tabs UI is going to be created. It will defer loading the UI underneath your other tabs until you first open them. Because performance, we don't wide load all that view. None of it's visible yet. Let's save ourselves some time, which is great. And there is something about being able to unload a tabs thing, and I'm going from memory here, and I might have to double check it because it doesn't look like. Oh, this is also a Metro. I should look at what this. I made an assumption about what this thing was. No, it is just a regular tab control. Yeah, it's just a regular tab control. So if we do something like is slow, heavy content, is there an easy way to stop it? So, okay, I love my WPF. This is one of the things that UWP and WinUI did correct, is they gave you a great, they gave you deferred loading of your XAML. So if switching tabs is slow, lots of content, heavy content, is there an easy way to stop it? So I guess there are ways to try to go about it. The easiest, so there's the easiest option is refactor the UI so that it's not as heavyweight. The other option is because the tab items, a lot of controls inside of WPF are content controls, and they derive from either like content control directly or header control, which is a content control or similar. And so if you have controls that load their views via data templates, via bindings, which is a great way of doing it, by the way, the binding, you can set a delay on it. So that can save you on, it can defer the loading, but at some point, if you have a UI that's just really heavy, at some point, you're going to have to eat that cost. So the easiest option is make it so that the cost isn't expensive, and consider changing up the UI. Like I know there was one project, I think Robert, you brought it into me, where I think the UI had something like 200 something text boxes all bound to a whole bunch of stuff, and it was it was a little slow because there was a lot of controls on that screen, a ton of controls. And so mitigating the number of controls that are on there goes a long way. The other thing that you can do, because it's oftentimes difficult, even if you have a lot of controls, sometimes they all aren't visible right away. So things like list box that have a scroll view in there, and I think I showed an example 5 weeks ago. One of them, we were talking about, there was the discussion on the nested scroll viewers, and we were talking about virtualization. And so if you have a UI with virtualizable controls like a list box, setting it up so that you can make sure that you are only paying the cost on like the 6 visible list box items and not the whole 4,000 or whatever, that will significantly improve your performance as well. So yeah, so I don't know. So there's not a great answer of how to improve it beyond try to mitigate it and take the easiest way to eat the heavy view is one bite at a time. Just like eating an elephant, one bite at a time. That would probably be the easiest way to go about doing it. I forgot what I was doing. Right. I was doing user control with view model. That's what I was doing. Woo boy. Woo boy, that was fun. Okay, so the idea is if we look at, let's see, hang on, I gotta clean some stuff up. View model. And I know you guys can't hear it, but so these headphones, I have one wire going into them, but I've got a splitter board to my left with 3 separate inputs, and someone is messaging me on some channel that I can't see because it's on one of my other screens, and I've got too many inputs and I can't tell where it is, but they just keep sending me stuff, and that's exciting. Okay, so close this. There's nothing better than hearing the little ping of incoming message and going, I have no idea where it is. Someone's pinging me somewhere. Probably my phone. Okay, let's see, something less accessible. Well, of course it's less accessible. Let's just fix that. Okay, so if we look at the main window, this pattern here that we started through, and this is, I think, the crux of the issue of the question, right, is if I'm setting up for a nice DI structure, if I've got a nice main window, it takes in a main window view model, my DI container, it'll create the window for me. I want it to build this thing up. How do I go about now doing the same type of thing for a user control? And I think there's 2 separate cases that's worth considering here. Do you have a user control that is isolated by itself? And in this case, this is a little bit of a contrived example that I've made up. This user control can live on its own. Like it's kind of its own, like maybe I'm going to put it inside of its own little pane on the UI or something, and its method of communication isn't going to be by direct reference. Like nobody's going to directly access this view model. Instead, it's going to be like it's going to post messages or something. That's case 1, right? I've got something that's isolated. It lives by itself. It's transient. It doesn't matter where it is. And then the other case is, well, I've got a user control, but my main window view model, it kind of wants to do something with that. Like, for example, if I've got a user control that represents maybe filling out a bunch of address information because I'm doing a shipping label or whatever. And I put that in, but on my main forms view model, when I hit submit, I need to go and gather all that address information back out from that dependent view model. Now I've got something that's much more dependent on how that's going to work. So then the question comes, well, how do we get those things set up? How do we do that binding? So we're going to do both cases, I think. We'll do both cases. So case one looks like this. We've got it. This is the isolated case, right? So we would go data context, Gets view model, something like that. All right, we'll add in our null checks. Whoop, that's not what I wanted. Add null check. Thank you. Really? That's how you're going to do the null check for me, huh? That is not even close to what I wanted. I'm also noticing that, so GitHub Copilot was impressing me a ton yesterday, has not been impressing me tonight. I don't know what it is. But I was also mucking with a bunch of settings, so I may have inadvertently broken something. Okay, so let's do that. Turn that off for the moment. And then Snoop, you go away for a moment. Okay, so we've got an isolation case. And so what we're going to do is we're going to pretend that this is some sort of headery thing. Because, sure. So grid, row definitions. Oh, that's close. You missed. It got close. It got close. And I appreciate you wanting to type out height and everything for me. No. We're gonna auto format that guy, and then we're gonna come in here. So we're gonna push our tab control down a level. So grid row 1, and then we're gonna put our user control guy up here. All right. So the naive case is we go user control, not user control. What did I call it? My user control, which is going to need to be local : thingy-mabobber. Yeah, that thing. Boom. It did views instead of local. What is local pointed at? I kind of like this being called local better. So we're going to come down. Oh, views is already existing and needed. Okay, so we won't touch it. We'll leave it there. We'll leave it there. Okay, so we could do something like this. And the problem is, and the thing is already squawking, and because it doesn't have a parameterless constructor. Right? This is problem one. Is it really wants this. Stop helping me, Copilot. If you're gonna type, you gotta type correctly. Sacco151, thank you for the follow. I appreciate it. Okay. So initialize component. We'll do something like that, and actually maybe we'll link them together. Nah, we'll just leave it separate. Whatever. We're gonna do something like that. Okay. So we can do something like this. This will make the designer a little happier. This thing exists. We'll be a little explicit. Grid, row 1, and just let's put a little content in this so he's not completely empty. So how about text block, text, binding foo, and I don't want to think too hard, so we're going to do that. And then on our view model, let's see, public string foo, hi from me. Great. We've got some content. It exists. It does a constant thing. Okay, so that goes there. That goes there. Let's just make sure that this guy fires up and won't actually work. Not surprising that it doesn't work because it has no view model. So because this guy's going to hit the DI container and there's going to be nothing there, right? Which is kind of sucky. So ways to go about solving this, because ultimately what we want is something, not the XAML parser to create this. Because once our other one worked, because that allowed for it to be injected all the way down, right? And that worked really well for us. Now we could do, so let's start with this. Let's add some registrations. So let's see, main window, and then main window view model. So we'll double these up. So we're going to actually come in here, and we don't want to do singleton on these. We're going to do transient. Because in our case, we are doing user controls, and I'm going to decree that this user control is likely to be used in more than one place. Right? The fact that I put it into a user control probably means it's not going to be a singleton thing in my app. We will build that up. Then now we need to try and take advantage of these things. Now, the first option that we have is just something like this. So inside of my main window, I can actually come through and do my user control. User control. And then after I initialize my component, I can have this. Because bear in mind, this is the code behind the code behind for the main window. You can use this. I see a lot of people who they start down the MVVM path and they get this idea in their head that you should never do anything in the code behind. That's also wrong. Use the code behind. The key thing here is that the code behind should be used for doing view related stuff. It shouldn't have your business logic. It shouldn't be used for doing stuff that should be in the view model. But if it's related to manipulating your UI elements or making your UI do something nice, yeah, use it. Have fun. That's what it's there for. So, again, the view should do view stuff. And if that view stuff involves both XAML and code behind, great. Just don't put stuff in your view that should be in the view model. That's where the line with MVVM gets drawn for me. Okay, so what we will do here is we will go with, I needed to add a name to that guy. So we'll call it, I don't know, X name about root grid. Seems good. Excellent. Okay, so if we do root grid dot children dot add, right? We can do user control. And then from here, we need to set the, so we're trying to replicate what was happening here, but we want to replicate it with a DI friendly way, right? So we have to set the attached property as well. So this is grid, and then set row on user control value 1. So for people who haven't done attached properties in code behind, they're just static methods. Done. Some people I've actually seen like to build up their UI in C#. I do not. I am not one of them. Okay, I think that's all we need. And then now this thing should actually launch, and it should have all the stuff. Hey, look at that. Look at that. So one option for going about and doing this, if you want to make your DI container resolve your user control, you certainly can do that. And if you're already following the generic host pattern that I set out before, it's as simple as putting the user control as a dependency. Because initialize component isn't going to, the XAML isn't going to be able to reach back into our DI container. It doesn't know anything about it. It doesn't want to know anything about it. You can try and do some weird hijacky stuff. Don't. You can build stuff up kind of like this. But if you put it in your constructor as a parameter, that will then trigger the DI container to go, I got you. I know what to do. Let me, we're baking a cake and we've now decided that my extra frosting needs some special sauce on it. Therefore, if I put it here, I can build it up and add it in. Now I've got my DI container instantiating my user control, and my user control can now take any number of dependencies that I want in here. Because I'm no longer, so proof is in the pudding. But with the DI container, we hit this guy. Poof. And we're happy. So that is one option there of going through and doing it the DI container way. Let's do it another way too. And we're going to just bump you down. So we're going to just stack two of these guys on top of each other. So what would be another way of going about doing it? So, and this is one of the ones, so that was first case, disjointed. So if you have a disjointed thingy, and you want your DI container to resolve it, you probably want to do something like that. Okay. Second case, we have something that we don't want to be disjointed. We actually, going back to my shipping label, right? We've got a user control that is my address input stuff. But when the user clicks submit on my form, I need to gather all of that address information and put together a shipping label to print or whatever. In that case, my form view model really needs to be able to look at my address view model to get that information back out. So in those cases, I think the easiest option, let's just flatten this guy out. Okay, I gotta take this off. Ooh, I'm gonna show this off real quick. My wife gave me a really cool Father's Day gift. So, bracelet, USB-C cable. So, now I always have a USB-C cable when I need it. But it also sometimes gets in the way when typing. So, I have a great wife. Okay. We were doing the jointed case. So my control view model, let's go with control view model. Sounds great. Okay, so if we have something like this, we can take in the view model as a dependency. And I actually want you as a property. So let's make you into a real boy. There we go. Something like that, something like that. So cool, bracelet. I completely agree. I had never seen something like that before. My wife's exact words were, "This is as close as I will let you to ever putting a USB port in your body." And I went, "Okay, close enough." Okay, so we are going to do a public property. And so we do have this guy is still registered in our DI container. So key steps here are make sure the dependent view model is registered. But then what we can do is we can come up here. And there was already kind of an example of doing this, is spin a data template for it. So what you can do, you can come in here and we're going to do an implicit data template. And this is going to be my control view model. And we aren't going to back it with a tab view. We are going to back it with a my user control. So implicit data template. But now how do we get from the main window view model? Because the main window view model just has a control view model property. So somehow we have to map that view model property into something in our view. Right? So we come over here. And in our case, we're just going to put it on the next row down. That we hang on. Did Copilot figure that out? Thought I saw it trying to type for me, and I was going to be seriously impressed. Oh no, you missed Copilot. Bad Copilot. Good try. No, that is not even close. Copilot is GitHub Copilot. Okay, real quick. Side note. So. I will warn people, there is a free trial that is for 30 days, 60 days, something like that. And then they're going to charge, I think it was like $100 annually or $12 a month or something like that. Don't quote me on that. But it is a pretty cool AI. It is pretty. There's been a number of times where it has legitimately just written the code for me. Copilot starts listening to things you say. You joke, Robert, but it actually, now admittedly, it was able to infer some stuff off of a PDF that I was doing, so I was given a PDF first spec, and I was coding to make it match the spec. And admittedly, the fact that I had done like the download one, and then it inferred that I wanted to do an upload, like I typed the letter P for public. It's about to write the next API method. And it went, "I got you." And it filled out the method for me. And I went, okay, that's pretty creepy. And yes, thank you. That's exactly what I wanted. So there are times it does creepily well. Specifically, things that are highly repetitive and follow patterns, like unit testing. If you look at a unit test class, a lot of times your tests, ideally, if you've written them well, like if you follow the arrange act assert pattern, there's a really well-defined pattern to your tests, and Copilot just eats that for breakfast and goes, "Let me write the next test for you." It's like, thank you. Yes, that's exactly what I wanted, but that's creepy. Stop it. Yeah, GitHub Copilot is like that creepy friend who is unfortunately always right. So there's that. Okay, so we want Control Tab View Model, and then we will do grid row, and then this one we're going to go down to 1. Oh, did we actually? I set the row wrong on this one. Set row 0. I don't want 2 of those. I just realized I set the row wrong. Oopsie. Okay, there's that. So yeah, so there's the in the code behind we'll do 0. In the binding one we'll do 1, and then in the tab we'll just push down to 2. Okay. Fire this up. And there we go. Ooh, that's actually a good point. So Chin Undercover comments, as far as I know, there's no offline mode, which means there is some gray area when it comes to company policy and some regulatory stuff when working in production like GDPR. That is a very good point, and definitely worth looking into. The other thing that they sort of have said, and I've gotten very conflicting information looking through the site, it looked like they were going to try to make it free to open source maintainers or at a steep discount or similar, but it wasn't real clear how that was expected to work, because especially for stuff like this or my materials design project, I'm all for it. I was loving it. So, but yes, you are absolutely correct. No offline mode, which is somewhat problematic. Though in those cases, I'm trying to remember, I think IntelliCode supports offline. I might have to check. I don't recall. But it doesn't ship anything out. It doesn't ship anything out in way of like your source code for its model analysis. So, but there we've got it. So, couple options. And then just going back to this. So the big idea here is if you have the user control view model injected into its parent view model. In this case, it just happens to be main window view model. It could be any of them. But if you inject it this way, you now have an easy case where, okay, now if I need to access this when, for example, when somebody clicks create new tab, I now need to do something with this view model, I've got access to it, which is pretty cool. The other thing that you can do is you can actually take this a step further, is we could actually put this behind an interface. Right now, this is a full view model object, and it is very likely that the number of, this view model may end up with a whole bunch of stuff on it that's just designed to support the user control. Put it behind an interface. This is a reasonable case for it. Whereas my main window view model might only need to maybe access a few of those members. Maybe it only needs a couple properties. Maybe it only needs to call the, get me completed address method. And in those cases, putting it behind an interface and having this guy take in the interface, the fact that that interface is backed by a view model, completely circumstantial at that point. So it depends a lot on what you're doing and what you're building, but a few different options available. One of those would probably be my typical approach for doing it. A lot of times I do try to avoid nested view models. Sometimes it's unavoidable. Oftentimes what I will do is I will have an interface that defines the members that my user control needs, but that really depends on what you're using your user controls for. So again, no silver bullets tonight. This is a lot of, here's some generally good ideas to consider, but each app is going to have its own way of doing things. So I'm going to check this one into. So we'll do something along the lines of adding in examples of nested view model. Yeah, we'll do something like that. Something like that, give or take a little bit. Okay. Okay, so I think, I'm just going to pull this up again real quick. I think I addressed most of the questions here. Yes. So for everybody who is interested, if you leave comments on my videos, I sometimes poach those directly for content. It's great. So especially if something, especially when I see large examples, when I try to put in as much effort answering questions as people put into asking them. So, okay, so let's back this up a little bit, and I need to go download files real quick. So stand by. I want to grab this. So Patrick, who I think is still in the chat, hanging out in there, ran into a problem with the date picker control. And I think it's actually an interesting one to look at because I've seen people run into similar problems a number of times. So I'm just going to extract this real quick into not that directory. And then we will, so there isn't a repo for this. It was just sent as a zip. So, okay. Okay, so we're going to go here, we're going to go here, we're going to go here. And we'll open up the solution. And then we'll point out the problem and the layout of it, and then we'll go from there. Because there's kind of a lot of stuff happening here. Okay, so we will fire this guy up, and then we will come back to what the problem is and how to go about fixing one of these. What? Could not copy. Well, try building again. Don't think, I know the project compiles. I launched it on my other machine. Don't give me crap. Okay. Okay, so if it's not obvious, this is not what the UI should look like. So, and I'm gonna do, whoop. So if it's not clear, that guy right there is a date picker control. Tiny little date picker control. And the date picker control usually doesn't look like that. Usually this little control guy, this little button here, is pushed off to the side. So let's take a look at what's going on inside of here. So the main window is a very simplistic control. There's not a lot going on here. Right? We're using the material design style for the window. Great. There's a background set. Great. It's a simple grid. In fact, there's a lot more rows and columns than we care about because we're only going to use one of them. We've got a date picker. There's a binding to a property in here. There's some fallbacks on the bindings, but ultimately the little calendar button, and I probably should have just, here, if you click on it, you can get right there and you can go through and you can pick a date, and it lets you pick a date. And you can see by the coloring at the bottom that the underlying control for the date picker is in fact working. So it is showing the underline there. And so if we look at the main window.xaml, it's like, okay, great. Nothing too exciting happening here. Let's look at the app.xaml. If we look at the app.xaml, we can see that there's some color resources in here. Great. There's some brush resources in here. Great. And then we'll note this little guy right here. So there's this resources material design.xaml. We go, okay, let's take a look at that. And inside of here, we can see that this is, anyone who's gone through like the getting started guide on the material design project has probably seen this before. There's a color theme that gets set in here. So we're using the custom color theme, pointed at some colors. We're bringing in some resource dictionaries for a bunch of the optional resource components. Great. There's a couple implicit styles, one for a data grid cell, which we aren't using a data grid, so we'll ignore it. We'll see a button here. Great. We're using a date picker control. So at least on initial look, most of this seems fairly fine. But we still have the issue of, well, hang on, what is going on? Oh, and I stopped it. What is going on with our date picker control? So there's a number of ways you can try and track this down. Snoop is definitely my go-to tool of choice. So obviously we start with Snoop. Boom. So once again, crosshairs next to the binoculars, drag on top of your target application, and then cursor over the element you care about and hold down Control Shift. Boom. Okay. So you can see I put my cursor right over the little calendar icon guy, and you can see there's the button right there. So, and if we hover on the pack icon, and this is one of the greatest things about Snoop, as you hover over items, it actually draws little previews of each of these all the way through. And if you want, there is the, where is the tracking? Where is the, they moved my cheese. There used to be a little button to view it as, to view the item in the zoom control. Did they move it or take it out? That would make me sad. Launch debugger. Sorry, I just have to know what this button does. Oh, interesting. Oh, this triggers a debugger launch for Snoop. And then you can Snoop. Wow, the level of recursion here is amazing. Sorry, I've recently updated Snoop, and I now have stuff that I'm not used to seeing, and now I'm all kind of excited about it. Okay, and I'm going to close Snoop and restart the application because the debugger launch has left it into a very interesting state that I don't want to really think about right now. I want to go back to thinking about solving my button problem. Okay, so we see this. Okay, so a couple things that are immediately obvious here when looking at it. If we look at this date picker, you'll note there is a width that's being set on it. So it's being set to a width of 100. And if we come in here, we can work our way all the way up kind of the food chain until we get to the date picker, and we can filter down to width. And we can see, okay, this has got a width of 100. So let's turn that off real quick just to see the results. And then let's look at height. Let's see. And so we actually want this to be nan. Okay. So if we look at this here, if we don't do anything on the setter, and I think if we just expand the width of this. Yeah. So one thing to note immediately as we expand this window, there's something that hopefully is a little obvious, is as I make the window bigger and smaller, and I do this a lot in debugging. This is a great way. Like, I love resizing things just to see how they resize, because that can give you a lot of hints about where the problem possibly is. So as I'm resizing this window, the one thing that I'm noticing immediately, the selected date is staying left aligned. The button that normally would be over on this side over here is staying roughly the exact same distance from the right edge, regardless of how big the window is. So I'm noticing this icon is sitting off to the side. So that immediately makes me want to start looking at things like horizontal alignment, left, horizontal content alignment, width, those types of properties. So if we come in here, we can do width, horizontal content alignment. We'll just do that. That'll probably give us enough stuff to do. And so if we come in here, we can see the pack icon's fine. It's not being clipped. We can see the button. And as soon as I click up on the button, the first thing that immediately comes to mind is, hang on, this thing's really big. So it's not that the button's being shifted over. It doesn't have like a weird, margin. That was probably another one to put on there. It's not that it's being pushed over. It's that the width of this button is actually set to 108. And when I look in here, I see width, and immediately this value source, this can be quite handy, is I can see, oh, okay, hang on. This button's, this width came from a style setter. So these value sources are really, really handy for figuring out where things came from. Because in this case, I know this width came from the style. Well, okay, I know that the default material design library didn't arbitrarily set that width. And if you recall, there's an implicit style on button right here. So if we come in here and go, oh, okay. So if we assume that this width problem or this width column is the other one. Oh, not shame on you, Patrick. I've seen a lot of people make this mistake. But the beautiful thing about Snoop, and you can get away with this with Hot Reload in Visual Studio too. Hot Reload, though, I only mostly trust it because sometimes it gets into weird halfway states. Snoop, you can just toggle the values, and that changes the runtime value immediately. So if we get rid of the width, we can see, okay, once that width assignment goes away, now this thing starts to behave a lot more like what we would expect. Right? The button stays where it's supposed to be. As I resize, it looks correct. So in the end, the solution is to just get rid of this width setter. And this is one of those things that works, like, this is both awesome about WPF and sometimes it's Achilles heel, is you can create these implicit styles anywhere. They're awesome. They're very powerful and they're very good. But one of the things that I'm always cautious of is when you create an implicit style, especially one at a really high level, like at the root of your window or the root of the application, is there's a lot of properties I usually avoid setting on them. And they're any of these size and positioning properties. So width, margin, padding, height, horizontal alignment, vertical alignment, those the positional and size properties, I usually avoid setting on an implicit style, especially an implicit style at a very high level. Because you will oftentimes run into problems when you set those types of properties at higher levels. Those types of properties, my experience has been, are almost always governed by a more local scope of what that needs to be. Sure, if I'm setting an implicit style on like a stack panel or a grid that has a bunch of buttons on a dialog and I want them all to be sized equally, sure, great, right? That's a valid case where maybe I use an implicit style to apply the same width to all of them to get them equally sized, or maybe same min width, right? You want to be careful on sizing stuff too, especially if you do localization. This is one of my constant frustrations with Visual Studio extension authors is Visual Studio extensions, oftentimes the UI is WPF, and very consistently, because I run my font size a little bigger than default for presenting like this, I find all of the dialogues where the text is just cut off. So for example, these ones are better. Usually there's plenty of them in here to pick on. And then this is the best part, is you can just kind of, there's not a ton that I'm noticing right out of the gate that get clipped, but usually things like this combo box have been problematic in the past. I've been filing bugs against Visual Studio and they keep fixing them. This is one that always bothers me. The vertical alignment on the checkboxes isn't centered, so things get off like this, and I would much prefer them all lined up straight. Same with the radio buttons. It's little things like that. And so when using implicit styles, I would say the setters in your implicit styles should match the broad strokes that you can make about, or the assumptions you can make about your application at that level. So if you're setting something at the application level, things that you can probably make assumptions on are, hey, I'm going to be following my company's color scheme, right? Okay, that's probably a pretty reasonable assumption. You can override that locally. We could theoretically leave this setter in and then go to a bunch of work to try to override it in all of the other places. But because you may not have access to all of the controls that this will get applied to, like in the case of the date picker, that button is something that's inside of the controls template, nested down in there a ways. So yeah, we can write some code to go in there and tweak it, but that's kind of a pain, right? We could also write a different button implicit style in here that turns it off. So for example, all kinds of ways to fix this. So, for example, if we said, well, we really do want all of our buttons to have the same width, and this is just an edge case, right? Like we could say that. That is the thing. I don't think that's the right solution, but this is an option. So, if we do something like date picker, resources, style, target type, button, based on static resource, X type button. So worth noting, for people who haven't seen this kind of syntax for based on before, this is how you base a style on an implicit style. Okay, so because this style here doesn't have an X colon key on it, there's no key to specify here. And so an implicit style, what WPF does is if you don't specify an X key, it will generate you a key that is the target type. So in this case, the target type button. So we will do one down here, and we will do setter property width value. Actually, let's make this obvious. Let's cut it down to like 20. I don't know how big it's supposed to be, but we'll and set. Let's do setter property. Some of these I don't remember what's actually set. Value red. I don't remember what's set inside of the control template directly, so some of these setters may not apply if the button has explicit setters directly on it. Yeah, so the foreground isn't there. And I wasn't sure whether that one I'm not overly surprised at, because I think the toggling here, that's probably being controlled by triggers. But if we look here, if we look at our width, we can now see that our width is set to 20, and that is coming from a style. So even though it tells us that our source is coming from the button style, sometimes you still have to try to figure out where it is. So you could theoretically still declare those properties, even the ones that I say don't. You could declare them higher up and then just make sure you override them further down. That is a thing you can do. Again, I would discourage positional and sizing properties being declared at higher levels, and usually just do implicit styles at a much more localized scope, where at the points where you need them. And then your world will be happier. But if you do need to, say, override a style, just declaring a different implicit one at a narrower scope lets you override it however you want. And then away you go. So, whew, that was a lot. I feel like I've been talking nonstop. My voice is gonna go. Okay. Whoops. I left that up. Turn you off. Thank you. And that's in the wrong folder anyway. Should go there. Cool. With that, I think I am probably going to call it for tonight, since I've been going solid for hours. But thank you everyone for coming and hanging out. I appreciate the questions, the feedback. And no problem, Justin Bieber. I'm always happy to do it. Like I said, if people have questions, feel free to leave it. If you're watching the recording of this video, definitely drop questions, comments on them. I do try to read and respond to them as quickly as I can, time permitting, for what it's worth. And if your question is really interesting, I may just end up doing a stream on it, or a short video just as a way of answering it, because I find that answering questions this way, if one person has the question, there's probably at least half a dozen or more people that have had the same question and just didn't want to type it up. So thank you to everyone for the questions and the feedback. We'll see everyone next time. Have a good night.